If you are a Christian, should you also be vegan or at least a vegetarian? Does Bible say anything about these kind of topics? Are you free to eat meat? Or should you stick with carrots, cabbage and broccoli? I know what you think. This kind of question does not make any sense. The Bible certainly does not say anything about these topics. Is that really the case? Let's find out. I am a vegan and I am a Christian, and it is actually a pretty rare combination, surprisingly so. Quite a few Christians look at me with certain kind of suspicion when they find out that I don't eat any meat or any kind of animal products. They look at me as if I have two heads or perhaps two different religions. I am on the other hand surprised that there are so few vegan Christians because it fits so nicely together in my head. So today we are going to go through some of my reasons. But let me start by saying clearly and openly that I don't think that Christians must be vegans. I don't think that's what Bible teaches. On the other hand, there are quite a few interesting stories in the Bible that have something to say to this topic, and they are frequently ignored, and that makes me sad. So let's start by looking at the main principle, at the fundamental starting point. The overarching biblical principle is perhaps the most misunderstood one, especially among non-Christians, but even among some Christians. And that's the fact that we are the head of creation, that we were given dominion over it. This is sometimes used to blame Christians for teaching that the whole of earth is here just for us, that we can do whatever we like with it. Sadly, we sometimes behave as if that's the case. In the creation story described in Genesis, human is depicted as the pinnacle of creation. The one creature created in the image of God. And not only that, it is given dominion over all the other beings. It is supposed to rule over them. And this particular aspect is where the root of the misunderstanding is. The Bible never describes a proper dominion, a respectable ruler, right for ruling, as shameless exploitation. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Whenever the Bible speaks of the correct use of authority, it always has a caring ruler in mind. King, according to God's heart, is one that puts the benefits of their subjects far over his own gains. And that's true, at least in their strongest and brightest moments, for all the heroes of the Bible like Moses, David, Solomon, or Paul. And it is true in the absolute sense for Christ, the ruler of rulers. So no matter what, for Christians, the fact that the humans were given authority over the creation must result in caring and respectful behavior to the creation as a whole. It cannot mean that we are free to exploit the earth in whatever way we want because we are the rulers. No, it never works like that in the Bible. And humanity as a whole certainly behaves that way. So the principle is clearly laid out. And it certainly applies to animals as well. But how exactly? Let's turn our attention to specific Bible verses and stories. The first verse I'm going to mention comes from the creation story. It is the verse number 29 of the first chapter of the Bible. And it says, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." So this implicitly, but pretty clearly, says that the first humans were vegans. It will become even clearer later on in our discussion when we talk about Noah's story. But even this verse on itself seems to plainly indicate that humans were given plants, seeds, and fruits to eat. So it looks like the state of humans in Eden was accompanied by veganism. And it is this creation that God pronounces as very good. Is this a good argument for becoming a vegan? I will leave that up to you. But it is certainly the case that Christians do look at Eden as, at minimum, depicting in some way the ideal existence, the ideal state of things. Let's now move by 8 chapters into chapter 9 of Genesis. The verses 1 to 3 are critically important in several ways. Let's read them first. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. This text gives animals to humans as food when it says, Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. That in itself strengthens our conclusion from the previous verse that the Edenic state was actually veganism. The verse also looks back and confirms that indeed, so far their food was only green stuff. Up to this point they were supposed to be vegans. It says, And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. This seems to confirm our conclusion beyond the point of any reasonable doubt. It also describes the new state of things with words like fear and dread. True, it is the dread and fear of animals, not dread and fear of humans, but in any case it is not really a language of joy and peace. Yet the conclusion is unavoidable. Humans are free to eat the animals if they wish. It is not forbidden. The next story we must mention is the famous story of Daniel, a strong character living in Babylonian exile. He endured much in the way of temptation and trials and stayed faithful to God. The part of the story of particular interest to us goes like this. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. Then Daniel asked, Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. At the end of 10 days it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. This story is frequently used to support vegan or vegetarian arguments. Few things are pretty clear. Daniel with his friends is opting for a vegan diet. That's certainly true. But it seems their decision is both temporary, and the main problem they are addressing is not the meat itself, but the inability to ensure that the meat, should they eat it, is clean according to the Jewish standards. Hence they would rather avoid meat altogether than eat unclean meat. This means that the story can hardly be used to support vegan or vegetarian diets as such. Yet at the same time it speaks to much more important principle. There are times and situations when it may be appropriate to avoid things even if they are not explicitly forbidden as such. Or, to put it in other words, something is not forbidden does not mean it is fine to do it under any and all circumstances. The next verse to take note of is Isaiah's prophecy, where in chapter 65 we read the famous words, The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, the lion shall eat straw like an ox, but the serpent, its food shall be dust. They shall not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain. This text that speaks a word of prophecy about the return to Eden or return of Eden is certainly, at least to some extent, metaphorical. But it nonetheless uses the picture of a straw-eating lion and a wolf with a lamb feeding together to depict Eden-like state, bringing our attention to the fact that we can rightly perceive the violence related to meat eating even among the animals as less than ideal, and the ideal state is depicted by its reversal. Again, I understand the text may be and likely is somewhat metaphorical, but it depicts the metaphors on pictures that use certain language for a good reason. The one verse that is brought to my attention the most frequently when I talk about this topic with Christians is following exhortation from Paul in his letter to Romans. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. And let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats. for God has welcomed him. The one who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. So I am not trying to pass judgment on anyone, I am just sharing my thoughts. So this verse, along with some other passages from Corinthians, as well as the famous vision of Peter of the sheet full of various animals descending from above, is said to give us the freedom to eat anything. And I get it. The passages are clearly talking primarily about clean and unclean food from the Jewish perspective, and about clean and unclean food from the perspective of meat, possibly offered to idols as a sacrifice. But even if we take these verses very broadly as permission to eat any and all meat, no matter what, it still completely misses the point. No one who knows their Bible would argue that we are not permitted to eat meat. That's what Noah was clearly given permission to do, and we are certainly free to do the same. But these New Testament verses clearly do not give us permission to exploit the creation and the animals in whatever corrupt way we wish. The last verse I'm going to mention is one of the proverbs from the book of Proverbs. The righteous know the needs of their animals, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. This verse clearly does not talk about eating meat. It, however, brings us back to our opening statement, where we talked about the fact that the overarching principle of the Bible in this area is the principle of the good servant or steward that rules dutifully over what was given to him to rule over. So righteous person, as the proverb tells us, can't be righteous only towards people and look the other way when the animals are concerned. So let's try to summarize what we read and said today. The Bible is clearly not proposing veganism as the only way for Christians. We are clearly given permission to eat meat based on the covenant with Noah, based on the words of Paul and the vision of Peter. Yet at the same time, it calls us to be faithful servants over the creation. Abusive and exploitative behavior clearly contradicts that purpose. So my decision to be vegan is simply based on the fact that the factory-raised animals and the mass slaughterhouses are far removed from anything I could call reasonable, non-abusive behavior required from us towards all of God's creation. The problem is certainly much more complex. It is not only about eating meat. The whole of Earth and its ecosystems should be of similar concern, and so should be mass crop farming. But I believe it is important to start someplace. In fact, it is our Christians' responsibility to pay much more attention to these topics. We need to make sure that the narrative that depicts Christians as those that assume the role of rulers over the creation, as if it gives them permission to do whatever they like with the creation, we need to change it. We need to correct it. And if it is how we live, then our lives are the first thing that needs to change.